Alrighty, guys, let's talk about ZBrush. Okay, cool. So you should be seeing my ZBrush screen. Um, ZBrush is a little scary. Don't worry. I am gonna help you through it. I'm a little scared of ZBrush, but we're gonna figure this all out. Mainly, I just want to show you the big controls that I like to work with. So this is generally what it's going to look like. You're probably going to have this little pop-up menu. It's called the light box. As you can see, it also saves a lot of iterations of your artwork. And if you need to go to projects, recent. So like if you go to projects, right here is a really great spot because you have a lot of starter files. What I will tend to do is I like the Zspheres. And I start, and there's poly Zsphere, but in this case, we're going to just do the general good old Zsphere. And I'm double clicking. And now we have our Zsphere. So the main reason I like Zspheres is also because I like rigging. And in some cases, I like to describe it as imagine we're making the bones to a rig, but then we can convert those bones or joints into a mesh. And so when you're making something that has a skeletal figure, that's really great. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just tapping and dragging, and that's how you rotate around on the screen. If you get lost, you can look at your little head in this corner. So if you want to snap to the closest, I would say viewport, like if I want to go strictly to the front, I go kind of right here, and then I hold down Shift, and then it snaps to the front. If I want to do a top view, you got to make sure you do both. Oh, I must hit a different mode, so we don't want that. We want to go back to, oh, I must have hit a button I wasn't supposed to. So let's make sure we're going not to sketch. You know what? Let's go. Perfect. Okay, so the fun thing with ZBrush is our history is right in here. It's anytime you make an action, it's going to save as this little bar up here. So when in doubt, you just go back in the history like I just did, because I probably pressed some random button and that's what turned it onto that. But let's talk about how we're going to move forward with this. So I already have symmetry turned on. But the best way you're going to find symmetry is here under transform. And you see I already have activate symmetry and it's already on the X form, which is great. So how I'm going to approach this for the more East Asian dragon is we're going to pretend this is the root joint or the chest area. And as you can see, if I'm anywhere over here, I can make a duplicate on the other side. But if I get close enough to the center, they're going to merge, which is great because we're mostly going to be completely straight down the middle for this creature. And then like little appendages or the horns will be symmetrical. And so how we create more Z spheres. And so like right now I'm trying to line, I'm clicking and I drag in order to increase the shape of this extra Z sphere. And so a lot of how I like to choose these Zspheres is, in this case, this is like creating the entry area of like, let's say we're going to go forward here to the neck, and then I'm going to create one way back here. We're going to kind of treat this as like the chest cavity. So I'm going to have it almost just as close. So like this will be the tail end to the rib cage. If you hear whining, that is Lady. She apparently doesn't. It's okay. I'm just giving a lecture. You can chill. Um, As you can see, I was switching here from edit draw to move. Drawing, basically you can draw new geometry, but if let's say I don't want to make anything new, I want to make edits, I'm just going to click off of here and go to move. And then I just select and I can move this. And so here I'm kind of treating this like this is the rib cage, chest cavity. This is like where the clavicle would be, and we're going to start our neck in this area. And so I'm going to go back to draw. And we're going to continue with this. So I'm going to go back here where it snaps. And I'm going to treat this like our neck. And so I'm going to keep it a little bit smaller than this. And then the head, I'm going to make it much bigger because we want to have that bigger size difference. So about there. That'll be pretty good. And to move it, so you're going to move different ways versus in here lets you really adjust it out. We probably want a long neck. There's a reason I have these little small circles in here. So I click and then drag it so we can kind of create this more elongated shape, and they kind of have a snatch in the middle. And so this is really nice because imagine your topology is going to go straight like this and then perpendicular. So this gives me a really good idea of what the topology is going to look like. And so I'm going to zoom out because now we're going to make the rest of the body. And so we're going to create that and this. I'm going to treat this as like the hip area. Imagine this is really elongated. Then we have like the spine, and then this will be the start for the hip. And then I'm going to treat this as, oh, did that, okay, so you see like here I already messed up because I didn't quite snap it to the middle. You know what we can do? You can do Command Z because I'm on a Mac, or I just go back one. Perfect. And I'm going to snap here because I want this to snatch a little bit. And then this is going to be the little tip of the tail. So I'm going to keep it pretty small. And then we're going to go back to that move tool. And because it's a little trickier to do because it's way longer out. And then I'm going to click back here and bring this just because so I can have a little bit more control. Let's say I think this is like either too big or small. You can always go and try to like scale up particular pieces. It's really subtle, so it can or cannot be helpful in a way. So let's say if I want to go click here, scale up or down the head. Let's say I want to scale down the head. So that way we're just a bit more proportional. Now you're going to see, like, even though I'm snapping to this side view, it doesn't look straight. It's because I have perspective on. So you can turn it off and on. Actually, in this case, let's turn it off. We really don't need that right now. All right, now let's get into the face. So there's different ways to approach the face. I still like talking about it as if it's a rig, because imagine this is how we're creating the bones for the head. So we have the whole face. If we're not having a movable mouth, you just can make one little piece for the snout, but we want to have his jaw open. And so I'm going to treat this as the top jaw here. I'm just giving it an exit point, and then I'm going to go, I don't like that, so Command Z, and then the bottom jaw, or at least this is where it exits, because I want to have that snatched bit to the snout. I don't want it to be a super continuous. And then what I'm going to do is go back, and this will be the tip of the snout and the tip of the bottom jaw. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to move them. So it looks a little funky, but trust me, this is going to make much cleaner geometry. I'm moving this so these aren't so close. So when it converts to a mesh, it's not going to be as much of overlapping. And so that's why I like to add those elements right there. Looking at the concept art, there's some horn elements. So I'm going to go back to draw, find where I kind of want that horn placement. I'm going to create the entry where it starts. I'm going to do this as, because it's going to bend around a certain area. And then we'll do this as the tip of the horn. And so let's say this just creates a little bit more of a circular, and then I always check each view. And so this just kind of helps me create that element. It helps to understand anatomy in this case. So let's say I'm going to start creating the legs. And so I'm going to create an entry point here. This will be the elbow, and this will be the hand. And so I'm going to move. And then now we kind of already have our forelimbs. And so I'm going to keep them pretty much like this. That way we're kind of still in our T or A pose appropriation for a Chinese dragon. So instead of going right here, a lot of how the hip anatomy for canines is you have like your hip joint kind of starts like here, goes back into where the hock is. So it's helpful to understand quadruped versus like carnivore anatomy. So, oh, see, what I did is I'm not quite on the spear, so I made a new spear. We don't want that, so I'm just gonna go back. So in this case, this will be like the knee to where the hock or the elbow is, and then the ball point of the foot. And I always move this guy out first. And then we have this, and then that's perfect. So in this case, these get a little tricky. I may have probably should have put a point up here. That way it comes away from the body a bit more, but I think we're fine. A lot of how I try to also approach this is to try to keep these guys as like close as I can. Lady seems to have found a grocery bag. Excuse me, ma'am. No, ma'am. Don't mess with that. All right, and so let's say I'm going to hit here to frame. This keeps our entire model here in frame. Let's say I'm pretty happy with that. That's pretty cool. So just to show you around, Subtool is kind of like the layer system. It's a little strange and bizarre, but for now, it's going to work for what we want to do. Actually, I'm looking at this and I want to move that back because that's where the jaw will start. Right now I'm going to close it. And it's also like the layers are here. They call the layers subtools. It's very bizarre. But let's say I'm happy with these Z-spheres, so I can't start sculpting on this. It's not treatable as a polygon mesh. So I'm going to go here to adaptive skin, and I can hit here for preview. This gives me an idea of what it looks like in preview mode. You know, it's kind of weird. It's like really skinny and emaciated, but you know, this lets me see if that like jaw is kind of where I want it to be, and it has a bit too much of that pinch there. So I'm gonna move this spear a little bit forward, maybe. Sometimes it helps to have like too open of a jaw. I think that might work. So if I hit preview again, you see we have less of that undesirable crease. Okay, I'm gonna say I'm happy with it. I'm gonna go down here to this button, set make adaptive skin, and then it shows up in here. So how this is working, move back to frame. You can always go back to your original Z-sphere. It's right here. And so we can always go back and forth between the Z-spheres. Actually, it's not showing up. I must have hit an extra button. Or maybe it didn't retain. But normally it's supposed to be a Z-spheres. I'm going to hit Z-sphere 1, Z-sphere. Oh, normally there's supposed to be that Z-sphere, but we're going to move forward with that. And I'm pretty happy with this. So let's get to sculpting. For now, I am not a fan of the skin shader. You're probably going to have either this matte cap red or matte cap gray. Gray is a really good one to start with. I like this sometimes depending on what I'm working on. In this case, cap gray. What is skeleton? This might be helpful in this case. So let's talk about brushes. So my favorite brushes, your standard is the one that's automatic. This just kind of creates a general like gooiness to it. I don't like it. I'm gonna hit back. Um, Clay buildup is my best friend. So what this kind of looks like is it's just almost more of like imagine a square brush. And I like this because it really builds up form. So this is really great for just adding more general anatomical features, especially if you have something with muscle fibers. So in this case, I'll probably like go in here and start like mapping out like this is where the nose is. And this is where I have a lot of like my reference open. So if I do my eyes, so this will be like the eyebrow. And just to get like different shape language and texture, I like to use this as I'm like trying to create where the muscles will be. If you hit shift, and this is always a smoothing version of the brush. I can always go back in and smooth different elements if I think it's a little too rough. Um, Draw size is how big the radius is. That's a really great way to approach this. The intensity of the brush itself is this focal shift. So I can do something a little more subtle. And if I hit back or bring this in, then this has that harder edge. And so that's a great way to approach this too. And so I often like to do this, a mixture of holding down shift and then going in with this brush. And so I like to keep it big in this stage because I really want to focus on these features of getting this jaw a little bit closer to what I want. And so in this case, I really want that jaw to be very like crocodilian, but also a little bit of a dog, because there's a lot of those references with these creatures. Because you have to think about like what animals were either prevalent in the time in China. Sometimes when lions were introduced, you see a lot of those lions in sculptures, especially around the palaces. It's going to be probably a different command on a Windows, but for my Mac, if I want to do a subtractive value, it's holding down Option. So I would use that in here to create like that crevice of where the inside of the mouth is. And then I'm just going to hold down Shift to clean this up a little bit. And so that's a lot of how I would approach using a lot of this clay buildup, going in and out, just so we can start working on these skeletal features. And so a lot of that it'll be mapping out geometry. You want to make sure you never get too um if you blow up the mesh sometimes, because you're gonna see like right here, that's getting into some really gross warping. That's because the brush is going to be too big and there's not enough geometry. Let's say in this case, this gets like really messed up. You can hold down shift. A lot of times can clean it up. That may not be good. There may be some, I'm gonna hit the backspace a lot. Let's say you get to the point where the mesh like shrinks into this really ugly form. I like to use the inflate brush to kind of fix it and it blows up like you're inflating a balloon. So let's say I want to make the paw pads bigger. So like here, that's one way to inflate. Let's say I want to make the base of these horns a bit thicker in here. So that's one way to approach that. You see this like ugly crinkling. I'm going to hold down shift and that helps clean it up. So a lot of holding down shift. Other little aspects of like polish might be really good once you're more into finalizing. So this kind of creates a little bit cleaner edges. It's like you're polishing. It's, I would say, a less effective version of the flatten brush. And I gotta find where that is because it's moved on me. Depending on like your viewport, things will move around. Let's go back here. There's flakes, flatten. There you go. Learning the alphabet. So this can create crisper edges, but you need to be a little extra wary of this sometimes. So I'm going to go back. I would wait to do that at the very end once you have your basic forms. Okay, let's talk about move and move topology. So these brushes are really helpful. Let's say like in here, I don't quite like uh, those aspects. I like to use move and then bring some of that. And so this one's really good if you're just trying to move certain aspects around. Let's say if I wanted something spiky, or in this case, I would do it as more subtle, bigger chunks. Let's say for the hair, how would we approach the hair? If it's a bigger piece of hair, I would have added like an extra Z-sphere. In this case, if you have smaller pieces that are coming off, my favorite tool to use for that is called snake hook right here. I'm gonna say yes. Cool. So in this case, I'm gonna select some pieces here. I'd say the brush is too big, that's why it did that. So let's go into where, and this can kind of help create, this is if you branch off, it's going to create into two versus the start here versus here. If you're creating little ridges, that'll be a great way to start, and you can always like double up on it. You're going to notice you're going to get some stretching because we're really stretching this mesh out. I haven't really talked about this, so you can kind of clean it up a little bit by holding down shift, but it's only going to use as much topology as you give. So right now we have the base topology. If things get a little crazy, this is where we go into the geometry tool. So we have a bunch of different ways to approach this. Um, we have Dynamesh. Dynamesh seems to be turning on. This is basically an organic way to add as much detail as possible while retaining shape. And so a lot of times I'll turn Dynamesh off and on, and now you see this is going to be a lot more clean in this area. It's adding more geometry, but I turn it off because if your computer can't handle it, it may take a while. I would say ZRemesh is a little more closer down the line when you're trying to really focus on the topology of the mesh. But for now, we're not going to worry about that. That'll be a later video. But that's a lot of how I would approach this. I was already starting to get too far into the details. If you wanted to do any like carving or sculpting, dam standard is the normal tool. I'm going to use, where art thou? You moved there. So if I'm doing more carving, like dam standard is going to be your best friend for that. But in this case, clay buildup is really where you need to be for this. Oh, snake hook's going to be great for teeth. That's what I wanted to mention. So doing the little teeth is how I would approach it. And then Dynamesh once, if it gets a little too, not enough topology to work with. So, yeah, you're gonna notice that's too big. So you may really need to make it smaller. And so, yeah, that's how I would approach the teeth and have your teeth reference up and available. Because I think really treating it as canine is going to look less like cliche. So I would really look at canine teeth. In this case, this doesn't really have a lot going on, but I would change like the teeth size. So like using the inflate brush will be really good in here. Spacing, because then like back here you may have something that's a bit more like a molar in some places. And then I would go in and Dynamesh one more time. And that really gets us closer to the look that we want. But yeah, I would go over this whole critter. You can always turn, I would say once you're done doing symmetry, then turn it off, and then you can add more asymmetry in here with the hair. And then we can talk more later about how do we actually get this a little bit closer to something more production ready, and then we have some tools for that. But for now, I would really focus in on these bigger shapes, go in and do some cleanup. And then if you ever need to go back, snake hook, you can snake hook for some of the fingers. But yeah, that's how I approach this guy. And you just have a lot more freedom and control, and then we'll get to rigging later. All right.